This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Krissy Vann. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
So today in this episode, we're talking about those moments in life when things get really dicey, things get really scary, and you don't necessarily have the option of tapping out or just not getting on that journey because you're already on the journey. And this actually reminds me of what we're going to talk about today, about a time when I was riding through the mountains and we were headed out on a big bike trip and we hit this gnarly storm, this torrential downpour, and I did not have the tires that I needed for this torrential downpour, and things got real dicey and real scary. But the option of just pulling over wasn't really an option. And the option of turning around wasn't really an option either because the rain was that direction too. And so the only reality was I had to ride within that storm without getting too much of my head of, will I actually make it through this? And this is what we're talking about today, is when life comes at you in a way of, am I going to make it through this? What is this going to look like? And necessarily pulling over or necessarily quitting or walking away from it or finding a different route isn't an option, because this is the only option of what is taking place in those scary moments in life when the idle Tuesday comes along and it knocks you off your feet. And we're going to talk about what do you do in those really anxious moments around, am I going to make it through this part that's come at me in my life? And we're going to kick it off with Krissy. And Krissy's going to talk very personally to what's happening within her life at this very moment, that's put her in a storm that she doesn't have an option of necessarily pulling over or changing routes. This is the route. And how is she going to make sure that she stays on it without getting lost in that storm? Here we go.
You know what's funny? It's the first time that, because we do this on video where Lori and I can see each other, and it's the first time that I find it really weird.
Why
talking about me? Makes me uncomfortable. It just shows I have such a I'm red as well, which is funny. I don't love vulnerability, but also I want to share this twofold because I feel like there's information that somebody could hear that actually could potentially flag something for someone that they love, that they notice, that could save their life. And also because I think it's really important to talk about it from a perspective of somebody that normally fronts as though all is well. I spent a life so practiced in perfection and kind of holding it together because other people were falling around you. So you take on that role. And I've really been opening myself up to creating space for when I need help or I need to vent or I need to cry or I need to talk, that I make space to do that with an understanding that it's not taking away or burdening other people, because that's generally the narrative that goes on in my head. Even to myself, when I've broken down in front of myself, you're like, oh, is this really necessary? That is my inner self-talk narrative when we talk about it. So I'm going to rewind toward the end of last summer. I noticed this freckle on my husband, and he is a ginger. We've all heard my love of the ginger populace. They're my favorite people, but they tend to be really covered, and he is not excluded from that statistic. And it was really strange because I actually started to become obsessed with this freckle, which really was a mole. But honestly, it was so small in the beginning, it looked like just a freckle. And the reason why it caught my attention is because it was just a little bit of an irregular shape. Nothing else was abnormal about it. So when we talk about intuition and gut intuition, this is where that bleeds in 100% for me. Because why, out of all the things on this man's body, did I become obsessed with this? I actually can't tell you a logical reason. It's even in a kind of it's on his arm, but in behind. Why, I do not know. Anyways, fast forward, and then I started to really obsess, and I was like, is it changing? Does it maybe have some color? And my husband was taking me seriously, but not really. I don't typically overreact over many things, but by about October, I was like, nah, can get this checked. And my exact words at the time were, you don't want this to be something that you wish you looked at earlier. And so he was traveling on a holiday, and he said, I'll make sure that I call the doctor as soon as I get back, which he did. We know our system is quite backlogged still through Canada. If you join us in the US, I know similar issues there. So it took quite some time before he had an initial doctor's appointment to get a dermatologist, goes to the dermatologist, and right away the guy was like, we're taking it. So even though he didn't have an appointment for biopsy, they took it in the office that day. Fast forward several weeks later, and we find out that it was melanoma. So skin cancer runs in my side of the family. And just to give a little skin education before we get into the anxiety land, because this info is important, there's squamous and basal cell skin cancers are more than likely the most common that you're familiar with, that you're listening. They make up the majority of the cases. And obviously, no one wants to find out they have cancer of the skin. It can be really disfiguring for people when they remove different pieces. And obviously, they have a slight risk of escalating into something more, but generally, that's not how it goes. Melanoma is the 1%er. It's also the biggest killer. And the reason why is because it's highly invasive. It moves through the layers of your skin, penetrates, travels to lymph nodes, and then ultimately would metastasize in other areas of the body. 10 years ago, it was pretty much a death sentence for a lot of individuals. The survival rates were extremely bleak. And that's just because for a lot of people, it's all about quickly finding it, right? And so a lot of people don't really pay attention to what's happening on their skin. And since it's a fast traveler, by the time you noticed it, it often had already ventured to other destinations in the body. It's also known to recur a lot of times. So if people aren't paying attention, they may miss it. And then they find out something's wrong with their liver. And when they track it back, it actually goes back to the skin. All that being said, if you're listening to this and you're going through this, I don't want to be a fear monger. The science is incredible right now. If it is something that has traveled, your rates that you see on the internet when you do a Google are far from the reality. And we have science to thank for that, but still very terrifying. And so we find out that it's melanoma. And not only that, my husband found this out when we were all traveling in Belize. And then I came home, I had a very short turnaround, and I had a really big work trip, which is kind of the beginning of the momentum that's happening in this new career journey. So he didn't tell me. And he just sat with this, and bless this guy, when he found out he had melanoma, he didn't know that that meant cancer in the moment. So I can only imagine the evolution of him just absorbing that. But at that point, that's the only information we have as well. And this is where I know a long segue there, but I wanted you to have the backstory for it to make sense.
Yeah,
it's where the anxiety was born, because he sat me down and we're talking about my trip. And I'm sure he's thinking, when's the best time to cut in and lead with this? And so he tells me, and then I knew right away what that meant, but I knew the statistics of yesteryear at this point. And so instantly it was that feeling where you just feel sick to your stomach and you want to be like, no, because we walk through this life with this. I don't care who you are. I'm somebody that subscribes to the fragility of life and lives very fully, but just because I live that way, I think I still am known, or like creates that mindset for myself that things won't happen to me. I mean, things have happened to me, but even still you move through that and you're like, but that won't happen to us.
100%.
It's for other people, right?
When you look too close at it, it's you're going, if that does happen to me, well, the fear of God goes through you. And so I think there's a certain level of survival that we all do, where just to be in a day, you have to create a barrier to some extent.
So basically the first 2 days of this, I was a fucking basket case. I feel like so many things that live inside me from that haven't been dealt with, blended with like what was being in front of us. And truthfully, like the fear and the anxiety was born out of lack of information. So for example, Lori and I were heading to Alita's Vancouver trivia night. And the minute she saw me and the minute I saw her, I had no intention of our moment going that way, but I crossed the street and then right away lost it in her arms. And you received me so beautifully and created this really safe space for it to be that. And for me to say, I don't actually my mind automatically goes to, do I have a right to these tears? Which is a mindset that I'm really working on, because it's so ingrained in me to not have space for that. That's just immediately where I go. And especially in a situation where it's like this, where I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be the worst or the best outcome, that we caught it early and that's the worst of it, and then it's done. And so I'm like, oh, it's going to be stupid if I'm upset about this and it turns out to be nothing. Then I've wasted everybody's time. That's quite literally what goes through my brain in those moments.
I can relate to that in a huge way. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But it's like, your brain cannot help it. Like Lori, as you explain, and you can kind of elaborate on this, when you are left with a lack of an answer, your brain's going to try and create it for you. And the intrusive thoughts, I'm somebody that feels really well practiced. My brain, I've described it before, it's like a carnival. Lori and I were talking about our dreams the other day. I'm like, oh yeah, I fly, I do this. Like, it's a very joyful playground. And
like actual dreams, like your sleep dreams is what Krissy's referring to. Like even in her sleep, she's on an adventure.
And like for me, that burns you sometimes, because I have a very positive view of the world. And so like when it comes to safety or like situations, I get myself into situations sometimes because I see the best in almost everything, which isn't always the lens that you want in the world. But in this moment, the intrusive thoughts, I was planning my husband's funeral. I was a widow and I was like, oh, would I online date? Like, what?
Yeah.
And all of that made me feel sick.
When you said, so here's the thing, to just be that everything you're saying is so natural and normal. So natural and normal. I did the same thing when Auntie got diagnosed in the weekend and I'm sleeping on her floor. I'm looking around at her furniture and I'm looking around and I'm going like, what are we going to do with all of her stuff? What are we going to do? And then you feel outrageously guilty because you're having these thoughts around, oh, you're already going to the doomsday. Not only that, but then you're thinking about shit that doesn't matter. But what it is it's our brain trying to cope. It's our brain trying to, it's what it's built for. It's a storytelling machine. And what it does is when it moves into that fear state, it's trying to control environments. It's trying to control outcomes. And it's trying to tell the story so that you have a resemblance of anything that is norm and anything that you can cling to. And so it's not necessarily that we're becoming selfish or desensitized or we're becoming catastrophic in our thinking because we're an unhealthy version of, or we didn't think we're as sane as we thought or positive as we thought, or all those things that suddenly bring the guilt upon or the like, what the fuck? It's how our brains are built. And when we go into a fear state to that level, our brain is reaching for anything to control the situation. And so everything that you're saying, Krissy, is such a completely normal reaction.
And it's one of those things when you are programmed. Like, I was grateful, first of all, that although I don't know if she's the therapist for me, that I've started the journey with that, because I have had just a different level of openness. And I'll give you a little bit of extra backstory to the moment that I found out and those 2 days. And obviously we'll talk about what's happened thereafter. But when we went to Belize, I can't even begin to describe the magic that happened within that experience. Mm-hmm. And we talk all the time how lucky we are over the community that we have and how life-changing it has been. But I feel like that entire shared experience just amplified to another level. And truthfully, I came back on another frequency. So on the 17th of March, so quite literally a couple days after, Lori and I just ridden in sand flea bites. So baths once again became my BFF. And I was taking a bath, and it was a friend of ours' anniversary, or not anniversary, but birthday of her mom who had passed away. And she knows this, but I struggle sometimes to provide what I feel is authentic empathy, because I'm somebody that skates through and doesn't really harp on the anniversaries. It's like a struggle sometimes for me to say the things. And I know that, and I know I should be there. And it's just, I have this protective disconnect on myself. Like, if I do this for you, then I got to feel mine kind of thing. But I made the effort to say that. And then I was kind of reminded of, again, just talking about thoughts coming into your sphere, of the fact that the 17th was the day that my dad got his kidney transplant when I was little. And then I thought about the 14-year-old girl, Amanda, who died in a car accident and whose family donated her organs, one of which happened to be a perfect match for my dad. And I thought about the letter that her family had written our family and the magnitude of the grief of that. I knew the story. I lived it, never felt it. The grief, sobbing, retching grief I came out of the bath with was insane. Like, I can't even begin to tell you the waves that were pulsing through my body. And then I was leaning against the mirror thinking, oh, fuck, my husband's out there and I'm like, no one can see this. And then eventually I was like, I also can't live in the bathroom and this doesn't seem to be stopping. So I came out, and same thing, talking about people holding space for you. I was laughing at one point because I said, I know I look a mess, but this feels so good. And I truthfully was like, that trip opened me up another level. Like, it's because of the safety that has been created by this community. And I share this because once now I have this news in melanoma land of like, is this going to be bad or is this going to be good? I turned into that same basket case and I was feeling the things, but I actually was really okay with that. And then I was like, we're going to be in this uncertainty for some time. I talked about the system moving slowly. So his surgery, because basically what they do after they find something like that, there's kind of the hole punch biopsy. And then in this case, they want to see the margins aren't clear, right? So the goal is to get everything that's a cancer cell out, however deep and however wide. So we knew we were waiting several weeks for that. And then we knew after that happens, there's going to be more waiting. And I'm like, I can't live like a basket case that can't function for weeks on end. I could if I decided to lean in only into these intrusive, awful thoughts, but that makes very little sense. So number one, I reached out to my community and talked about it. Instead of deciding on their behalf that I was a burden, I went, fuck it. These people have proven to me that they're there for me and that they are safe. And so that was number one to move me through those first few days. Number two, I actually even was honest with my superior, which was a big deal for me. I normally keep my personal life extremely far out of my work life. And all I said was, I've got things going on. I need you to know that right now I'm giving you 100% of the 50% that I have. I am not operating at optimum capacity. And I knew that because by day 3, I missed an interview, which I have never done in this role or in my professional life in quite a long time. And truthfully, when that happened, not a grand, massive deal in the scheme of life, I went into a panic attack. I had to disrobe my clothes. I felt like I was going to vomit the sweat. I was on my knees over missing the interview. We know that's not what was happening there. My body was in such a state of fight or flight that one little action threw me completely. Then I knew this was being felt a lot deeper than even I was aware on the surface. So I contacted my therapist that, again, I don't know that she's my therapist for life, but I had an appointment that Friday. And this is where we talk so often in these moments where you're kicked into the hole or the hole is trying to pull you down. You have to do what you can to take the steps that you know that are good for you, even though all of them are going to be challenging in that moment to actually reach out and set up.
Yeah. One of my closest girlfriends right now, her mom has been diagnosed with cancer and is not doing well. And she was really struggling in it all for obvious reasons. And one of the things and she's built like us, Krissy. She's like, I say built, no, trained. She's exceptionally independent. She's exceptionally like, I take action person. She made the ill-advised mistake from, society to, stick up your chin and you just keep going, push those feelings away. That's strength and all the above. And she's herself really, navigating that new version of allowing and processing emotion, right? And feeling it. Anyways, shortly after the diagnosis, about 2-3 weeks, maybe, she was like, I I'm really struggling, I'm just trying to make it through my day, but I'm a mess.
Yeah.
And so I said, here's the thing. It's allowing yourself and giving time and space to process. So why don't, and at the time too, this is all happening in the last couple of months. There's been a lot of transitions with still the aftermath of my aunt's passing, of giving away all her stuff, putting her house up for sale. So me, myself, am going through another layer of the processing of grief. And so I was a bit of a hot mess too. So I said, here's the thing. Every single day, we're going to make a little voice memo for each other, or a video message. And we are going to set our intention for the day, but also say the thing that we're scared about, or say the thing that's vibrating through us that we're trying to not say out loud or harp on, and just get it out. We've done this every single day, I think now for 3 weeks. And it has been so helpful and so massive. And even the videos, and she says, I even actually watched the video back, what I've sent.
Very cool.
Because it helps me to see what I've said, because I just talk out loud. And I kid you not, the difference from this person, even in that short amount of time, to like the video she's sending me right now to at the beginning, is night and day. And here's the other thing. Things haven't got better in that world. They've actually gotten worse. Things have progressively gotten scarier. But she, by being able to process out loud, and one of the things that we've talked about is like, or that's come out in our videos too, is she was going like, I try and not harp on it or ruminate on it, and then I crack later in the day. So we were saying like, what I do, what helps me is I feel it right off the bat. One of the first things I do in the morning, I allow myself to look at it. I allow myself to feel the feeling around whatever needs to come up. I feel it, whether that's a cry or just a thought, or whether that's the scary feeling. And then I recognize, okay, now I'm going to choose a different thought and a more intentional thought of where I'm going to go for the rest of the day. But I'm acknowledging. And then it's like, also, I feel like I definitely have more of a scope of, if it does creep up later in the day, I'll allow it in. But it's that thing we've talked about before, where you release the valve a little bit. Totally. So it doesn't, explode at something completely different. And it stepped into, and that's something also that she's just like, holy crap. I'm not like, oh no, don't look over that shoulder. It's Illyrian. It's coming closer throughout the day. Keep positive, where it's that like, where it's the positivity that is about a denial more than anything else and isn't helpful, versus really acknowledging something and then making a choice from that space to move on, rather than running from it, because then it's not really a place of intentional acknowledgement and choice about how it is you want to see it or feel about it. Because it's that like running from it, which is what you and I and my girlfriend and a lot of us learn to do in and around being positive and or choosing how you're going to deal with something. Because I think that is powerful and resilient. But when you don't acknowledge what's actually happening and look directly at it, then I feel as though it's not actually a state of resiliency or a state of positivity. It's a state of denial of what is and trying to create a reality that then when the real reality does happen, you're just a fucking disaster.
1000%. I, in tandem with that, the way I kind of visualized it and helped me work through, because I was like, okay, anxiety generally is born either in the past, something that's happened that we're thinking about, or in the future, where something like this in the waiting, the dance is obviously the concern, and the anxiety is born in the future. What is this? What will it be? And I was like, I can't do anything about that. I can only do with the information I have in this moment. But I knew this isn't an anxiety, exactly that I can just shove away. One option of that future is scary, is terrifying. It is my worst nightmare. And so instead, I just visualized my anxiety next to me. It wasn't going to rule me in front of me, and it fucking wasn't going to claw me backwards. I was going to just walk alongside it. And I think even having a visualization exercise of putting it there, of being like, you're here and walking beside me, but you're not going to dictate what path I'm going to go forward or backwards. That choice is up to me. And I'm going to choose to walk forward through this. And I'm going to do that bringing in all the tools that are going to be helpful. One of the things that you said to me that was so brilliant and helpful in the moment was closed for business. So, you know, I'm somebody, I love listening. I do pride myself on being an active listener for people. And when you are somebody that generally creates that for people, you often end up being the one that receives all the things, the highs, the lows, etc.
From other people's lives.
From other
to be clear,
people's
yeah,
lives.
from people coming in and utilizing that skill set and that kind of part of yourself is like, hey, that's my friend I'm going to call when things are difficult and tough, which is a beautiful thing. But when you're in it and you're in your own space where you only have the energy or capacity, then we can do the thing where we're like, oh, but that's my role. And then you give the energy there, but then you've got very little left for yourself when you need it the most. So I just wanted to like really get clear on that for what you're going to say next.
You're the one that gave it to me. And you were like, you are closed for business.
You're closed for business with kindness and love. And it's that hard line that you have to make for yourself, for your own capacity, for your own mental health. Closed for business.
And that was just really helpful too, because you can, especially when you're used to those roles, you then impose guilt on yourself if you're not living up to an expectation that more than likely you've created for yourself too. If you communicate well, nobody's going to have that expectation of you. It's really about communicating with others. But truthfully, because of all the tools after those first few weeks, I've been in a really healthy brain space. It's not to say that exactly as you were speaking before, I'm not ignoring what's transpired by any means. I've talked about it as I've needed to talk about it. Definitely, even as we record this morning, I actually feel decent, but last night I 100% did not. Essentially, we've been waiting for these results for 4 weeks and change at this point, and we've been playing phone tag with a surgeon who basically just called yesterday and was like, you have an appointment to see me next week, and then called after hours again last night to say, please save this number because I need to get a hold of you. And trust me, when that's the same surgeon that called you on a holiday Monday and a Sunday night, and you've just played phone tag for several days, it would be very easy for the mind to wander that it's not the best news, but also we don't know. And that's exactly what I could feel the shift in our household yesterday. Obviously, for my husband, I can't even imagine because it's your own body you have curiosity around, and I could feel it immediately. We just had like a super long hug where, a hug that communicates so much information without saying words. But again, it's one of those, it's scary, but also I'm not going to live in that until I have the information. Like, that fear can walk alongside, but I refuse to let it rule where I'm going in my day. And it's again about communicating with your people. Like, for me, as I say, the souls and the bond that we all have, that is something I'm incredibly grateful for. We always say it. I don't know how I did life before that. And I think it's really important about finding people in your life that encourage you to grow. And I think for a long time when I would hear that statement, not shocking, being the perfectionist and ambitious person that I am, I would always translate that to a professional growth a lot of the times, where I'm like, no, I'm growing even in learning how to feel and communicate emotion and allow emotion to move through. And I don't think I would have gotten to that point without my circle. And truthfully, if you're more of an introvert, I think of my sister, for example, who's like a too close pal person, and that's the bucket full type of thing. Even if you look at the role of therapy and things like that, it can help you grow as a person. And if I didn't have that, I just don't think in this level of uncertainty right now that I would be navigating it in a capacity that feels real. I don't want to say that feels right, or it just feels really authentic. Like, it just is. And there's a power in that.
I think what you have, I can only really speak for myself in this regard. but it sounds like this is a very much parallel for you of what you just said. But it allowed me to get messy and unknown with it all. But I knew that there was a soft place to land. And I have amazing, amazing friends and women in my life since always. But I don't know if there was necessarily, they had the capacity yet from what they'd experienced in their lives, that they knew quite how to catch me. Mm-hmm. And I always had experiences in a capacity that I had the skill set and I had the ability to catch my friends. But when I free falled and they were like, I got you, but then they got distracted with something and I was like, ow, and it would be the cement would hit. And not because they didn't intend to catch me, is because they didn't have the embodiment yet of life experiences to catch me, or I don't know how else to quite put it into words. And this was the first time that I had people that had the skill set and the capacity that I could get really lost and I knew I'd be caught. And I've never had to free fall so messily as I did over these last 4 years. And I never once that I can recollect feeling like there was lonely moments, but I think that's for any human being. But I never, ever felt as though if I really needed in a moment, or the moments that I completely became so vulnerable and all the things that nobody looked at me with blank stares. Nobody was just like, hey, I want to be there for you. But then when you actually do it, they're like, oh yeah, I'm just sorry about that. And you're just like, oh, hit the cement. That was my head ricocheting off, because I know on the surface you're saying, I'm so sorry about it, but your insides are like, I have no idea what to say to her right now.
You're like, I'll just grab some gauze, I guess, and walk away.
Yeah. And it's not because of ill intent and not for the lack of love for me or wanting to be there. It's just the lack of ability of whether it's allowing themselves to go to that depth yet in their own lives, or not having actual experiences with deep, deep loss or deep, deep terrifying moments to the extent that you do when you are facing, I found that like friends that had gone through like super messy divorces could get it. And people that had experienced very close loved ones' deaths couldn't. Those are the, like things that just uproot the world that you see it so far, I guess. And so if you have people, and if you're somebody that hasn't had those experiences yet and you want to be that for people, I think when you're listening to their story and it scares you, allow it to scare you. And maybe that's it too. Like you don't necessarily, but allow yourself to go to that scary place with them, because I think that's it. Is like, we all have looked at one another. And when you shared that moment when we were in the park and you let it all come out, and I could just see the fear. I allowed myself to not necessarily it become but I allowed myself to go to that space with you, because I was like, man, do I know this fear? I'm going to sit here with you, this fear.
Instead of, I think we always have this gut reaction to be like, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. Which like to some capacity, like things always end up okay, even when they're bad. Like life unfolds as it is. But you were like, yeah, this is scary. Yeah. And there is comfort in someone validating to a degree of like, yes, you're feeling this. And that makes a lot of sense to feel this way.
It's like Gav having this is really scary. And that's just it of like, we do not know what this is going to turn out as. What I do know in that moment, and what we spoke to and what is that however this goes and every step of this way, we got you.
And I know that.
Yeah. And like that in itself was like, and that's the thing that you guys on my side of things was always like, we got you. This is fucking scary, but like, we'll walk this beside you, however you need that to look. And isn't that like what we're in each other's all, like every relationship, no matter the dynamic, is like at the end of the day, if I'm in your life and you're in my life, it's not your job to make this go away for me. It's not your job to like help me stay in denial land. It's with you to say like, I'll step into the scary with you.
Yeah.
You know, when we're facing these really terrifying moments in life, and it's not about, you know, creating worry where there is none. It's going like, well, let's look at what is scary. And also anxiety can be a great thing, because anxiety helps us take action. Anxiety lets us know where it's like, hey, this is where you should be fucking fearful. This is where you should. And this is the action to take around it. You know, like Gav's doing, he's sitting with his black shirt. Maybe he needs not a black one.
His black long sleeve.
Black long sleeve. I looked at Gav. We're on the beach. I said, Gav, you hot, man? He goes, I'm dying. I'm like, my love, I got an umbrella right here. Let me just at least put this over you. And also, I'm going to get you a white one of those, because you don't need to wear
absorption of the sun.
Yeah, you know, but he's doing his best. He's taking action around and being very cognizant and real about what's happening. And I think you are too. And so I think you're allowing anxiety to move you into action, like you even did when you were like calling up and making follow-up and making follow-up calls to the clinic and getting his appointment moved up. And like that anxiety you've used of like, where do I take action? How do I take some control where there is control? But then I also think you've done such a beautiful role of recognizing of like, well, when am I worrying or creating more or hyper focusing on what could come of this, that there's a chance it might not. And there's a chance that it is, but we're not there yet. And so this is where it's unhelpful action, because I'm creating 100%. And that's all. And all that is our brain, like I spoke in the beginning, of our brain trying to have control where there is none. Our brain trying to create a scenario in which we're protecting ourselves from the pain. You cannot, I'll tell you right now, I don't know any which way you can protect yourself for when those moments happen, how they happen. You can worry all you want, but it doesn't mean that you move through the pain faster because you've pre-worried about it. Once it comes, you have to feel it. You suffer twice. And so it's just that thing of like, I'm going to feel what I can feel about what is and acknowledge what is. And then where do I now put myself in a position where I can feel the other sides of things, which is also deeply appreciation for those people right now, where you're at, what you have with them, the smell of them, the feel of them, all the things, because whether or not you have 5 more years or you have 50 more years together, that's what we should be doing bloody anyways.
1,000%. It's like a whole different lens, right? That really is the lens we should live through, but we just get caught up in life.
The invisibility of it all, which we also talked about, because it's also so hard to look at the reality, but that also creates the contrast in which you live more deeply and more appreciative and more, tactile, everything.
So for our motivation maintenance, we talked about so many tools to move through this, but my motivation maintenance is going to be about your motherfucking skin. Listen up, friends. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, it was intuition that had me notice this thing, but it also was education. And my education came from working at the Weather Network, where we had a commercial that ran every 6 minutes. I would be live and then it would go to commercial break and I would see the commercials and they were the same fucking ones over and over again. And one of them was about melanoma, which makes a lot of sense because we had a UV index and they sponsored that shit. So you need to know that, which is also like fucking crazy, by the way, because if I had not seen that many times, I would not have realized that this particular freckle was concerning. But you need to know that when it comes to our medical system right now, there is such a shortage of dermatologists as adults, especially ones that grew up in our generation, our skin cancer rates are massively on the rise. And that's because if you were like me, you tanning bed hopped your way, you believed that your burns would turn into a tan. I can't even tell you how many layers of skin I've peeled off my face in my lifetime. Like, the damage is done. And because of that, the rates of this are happening in people under 40 at a massive leap. So even when you look at statistics like that, it's not something reserved for the elderly toward end of life. And with melanoma, it's your A, B, C, D, E's. So asymmetrical, if you have a mole or freckle that basically is not looking perfectly circular and is looking asymmetrical, that is a concern. Border, often it'll have irregular edges. So you're really just looking for something that's an irregularity. Color, if there's different colors that are showing up in the mole, that's a bit of a red flag. Diameter, is it growing? Oftentimes these things are getting bigger. It's not going to rapidly grow overnight. It can, but like, you should be paying attention to your skin. Take pictures if you have to. And then E for edges, once again, just that irregular edging on it. But make it sexy. I don't know. If you don't have a partner, let's make it not weird after a one night stand saying to someone like, you should get that mole checked. You might just save a life. But honestly, do an audit of your skin, whether you take photos or you absolutely can go to your family doctor if you have one, or a clinic, and get a referral. They will just never, ever offer it to you. But 1 year, yearly skin checks is something we quite honestly all should be doing. And adding to that, don't discount yourself. It would have been really easy. And I know that he felt this way at the beginning, and it's exactly how I would feel, that it's something that you can just put off. If it feels a little weird or funky, like, advocate for yourself. Go do the things, because it could just be the thing that saves your life.
I think that's such great advice. Because, and don't wait around till it gets bad enough. I know even for my aunt, she had stomach cramps and all the things. And that was one of the things. She's like, why didn't I go sooner? And a bit of it's like, because I didn't want to know what it was. And I just hoped it also would just go away. And I think that's the thing, is you have to really advocate for your health. It doesn't mean that you have to become whatever it's called, where you're like hypochondriac. Yeah. But I also think that you just have to be like, hey, if you have something that you're just like, this feels off, make an appointment. Just go check it out. You got nothing to lose. Like, I've even just been super lethargic for a very long time now, and it ebbs and flows, and it could just be grief, and it could just be, but I'm also like, I ain't fucking around. So I've got an appointment. I'm going to go get blood tests, because I'm just like, I've got to be proactive.
So worth it. And especially I get that we rag on our healthcare system, but at the same time, like, it costs you nothing. So even if you have to do a little waiting, jump through some hoops, make some extra phone calls, we're still a lot luckier than a lot of places in the world. So capitalize on that shit.
So my maintenance will be more for the actual, like, how do you help yourself if you are something kicks up, something scary, or you're just a person that's more prone to anxiety and just you're having it, sort of thing. And so the biggest thing is recognizing of like, where is this anxiety is helpful, and where is it something that's actually creating more anxiety or creating a pattern of anxiety, right? And so one of the kind of tools that I utilize is like writing it down. So I write when I can find myself ruminating or something that's a pattern of anxiety on a certain something. I just get it down on paper of like, well, what am I creating? And then I look at that and I scan of like, well, what do I know for sure? And what part of it's a story I'm creating? And then I write down the part where I'm like, well, what do I know for sure? And then I write down, well, what can I do about it? And I'll write like 3 things that I can take action around it, because nothing helps as for the long-term anxiety of that thing, then when you start to take some sort of steps towards alleviating, because not only does it create where you do actually have some control over it, but it actually then sets that part where you're like, well, I'm doing something about it. But how do you do it? Or what are the tools that I've learned from the psychologists and neuroscience and around how the brain works is, how do you actually interrupt it enough to even maybe get there, or those moments where you can't write it down, or you're just like, holy fuck, I'm just anxious. I might not even know why, but anxiety is riding through me. And so 3 things, just 3, super easy, is Your toes. So like stomping your feet or wiggling your toes. If you can stomp your feet, if you can't, you're just like standing with someone and you're feeling it. Actually wiggle your toes, is because even the movement of bringing yourself into your body helps you take yourself out of your brain, it interrupts that thought pattern. Another one that's super cool is scanning your eyes left to right, left to right, left to right, and very quickly. And it sounds ridiculous, but this is like fully proven. This is something that they've been able to, like wire people up. And it has to do with the part of our hard wiring that was having to scan for trouble back in the day when we were like lions, tigers, and bears and all the things. So scanning your eyes back and forth, and also the movement around taking action about like, it essentially lets your brain know that like you've got this, your nervous system can relax, you're taking action around it. And I've utilized this one numerous times. It's super cool. And half of it's also because I'm like, this is super weird that I'm doing. And that helps interrupt the thoughts and reminding yourself that like any and all emotions are energy in motion. And so utilizing your body to extract that energy. And we talk about it a lot of like dancing movement. So even just jumping jacks, swinging your arms, if you can put a song on and have a little dance, but making your body move in a gross motor way. Sorry, gross motor means in large movements, getting my early childhood hat on here. But moving your body in large, big movements is a huge helpful way. And if you have more time and space, I can't say it enough of like, get the story down, recognize what is, feel whatever you need to feel about what is, write down what is now the created, what is the story that your brain's telling yourself to try and protect yourself. Let that go. Recognize that's all that is a story. And then what's two things, one thing, actionable thing that you can take around what is, whether that's a phone call, whether that's, phoning a friend, phoning a clinic to move ahead an appointment, like what is one tangible thing that you can do around what is? So that's kind of my convoluted motivation maintenance.
It's a wonderful motivation maintenance, and it leads me into my quote perfectly.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah, Sarah, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Hey, Sarah.
Oh my God. Okay, obviously, I know this. Well, I shouldn't say obviously. I just found out that pickles were made from cucumbers. So nothing is obvious to me yet, clearly. But this I do know. And I've never actually thought of it. And what a beautiful thing to sing to yourself, truly. I was totally like, I'm going to sing that to myself every time I start to get like really in my head about what is or what.
The problem is, I think I actually know that song from The Simpsons. Like, I'm fairly sure Ned Flanders sings it. Like, that's all I was
really? Oh, I don't know it from that, but I love that you do.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Well, that's going to save me many a days, I swear. Okay. Mine, let me find it here. Our anxiety does not come from thinking about the future, but from wanting to control it.
Yep.
By Khalil Gibran.
And that, my friends, is your
motivation.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Krissy Vann, and me, Laura Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.